Hello, colleagues. My name is Frank Norris, and I am one of the co-authors of the first independent post-Ofsted inspection survey report that we published earlier this week. And this conference is a way in which we can share our findings and our insights with the profession. And I'm delighted that we're joined by so many of you who are clearly interested in this work. And what I'm going to do today is act as the person who chairs and introduces the event. And what I want to do is make sure that I get through to a point where I can start sharing the insights with you, and we can then start to consider what some of those points are. So the way it's going to work is this introduction, we're going to allow colleagues through the chat facility to make comments, which we will pick up later. We're then going to be taken through by Professor Peter Timms, who's going to analyse the ratings. Then Professor Frank Coffield will look at the head's comments to the survey findings. And then we've got three guests who are going to talk about their personal insight. Some of those are from receiving an Ofsted inspection, some of them are related to some academic work that's been going on for some time. And at the end, Professor Chris Pascal will chair a discussion with you all, and Peter will close it all up. So that's what we're going to get through today. So the origins of this survey, Professor Frank Coffield at the top there on the left and Professor Peter Timms, they've done a lot of research into the work of Ofsted over a number of years, and they created a Transforming Inspection for Good website, and so they've been promoting that. I believe I actually met Peter at an NGA, I think it was then, last NGA conference last year, where I was asked to speak about our findings from something called the Alternative Big Listen, which is some work I undertook with Professor Colin Richards, who is a former HMI similar to me. So we undertook that, and we also undertook a further alternative big consultation survey as well. Those results were highly critical of Ofsted's planning for addressing some of the weaknesses in the system. But we all met, and actually we decided that we could work together, and we focused then on the post-inspection survey, and I'll explain why in a minute. And we've also been joined by Professor Chris Pascal, who works for the Centre for Research in Early Childhood. So we all sort of came together and decided that there was some work that was required in order to gather the views of those people who had recently been inspected. So I think it's worth remembering where the origins of the current Ofsted school inspection framework, where it began, and that was with the very sad events that took place at Caversham Primary School. And what was clear was that the coroner's report that looked into Ruth Perry's tragic death actually made clear many of the issues that she was affected by through the work of Ofsted, not just through the work of the individual inspectors involved in that inspection, but also through the framework that they were using and the relationship that exists between the inspectorate and schools. So I think it's worthwhile just acknowledging this, because this is the reason why we're here. And sadly, I still get regular contact. I have regular contact with head teachers, some of whom have said to me that they have felt suicidal following their inspection. So this is not an issue that has gone away. So, following the coroner's report, Ofsted made a commitment to sort of address some of these significant weaknesses. And Colin Richards, who's co-author of the report, wrote recently in her Learning Review, following the shocking events at Caversham Primary School, where the Ofsted inspection was identified as the causal factor in the head teacher Ruth Perry taking her own life, Dame Christine Gilbert, who is now the chair of Ofsted's board, strongly recommended the administration of post-inspection school surveys should be commissioned from and published by a third-party independent organisation. However, Ofsted has not taken up that recommendation, so we have. Now, what Ofsted said was that they said that it was going to be too costly, and it was going to be organisationally very difficult, very challenging. Well, I can say now that we have undertaken this work, and Peter shortly will explain how much it's cost us. It's not expensive. Secondly, on the organisational issue, you will see in our report the reasons why there is a desire not to actually get involved in this. Because organisationally, the comments that are coming from schools are highlighting some significant issues around the way that inspection is conducted, but also the framework in which Ofsted inspectors are expected to use. So we published our report. We managed to get it out in time for the Education Select Committee, and we shared it with all of the members. The report did get good coverage. As I say, the Select Committee received the report and the press release. HMCI faced challenge from committee members on a number of the issues, although he never referred directly to our report, but in his opening statement he made clear that he was aware of it, but the general issues that were coming out of that report. We're also aware that a television network have pulled together a piece which will be broadcast in July. Unfortunately, there's a lot of politics going on over the last few days, so it was dropped. But we do know that they intend to use that, and that will highlight some of the aspects of our report, views of head teachers about the Ofsted inspection process. So let's find out now by listening to Professor Peter Timms as to what did the survey report reveal.
Hello. This is my slot where I'm going to say something about how the questionnaire was set up and the ratings that came with it. And in particular, I'm going to say how we collected the data, what we collected, and whether what we collected was representative of the schools that didn't respond. Then I'll look at what the ratings were and leave it to others to talk about the comments that they made. So how we collected the data. Every Monday at 9:30, Ofsted release the latest set of reports, and they've been doing that with the new framework since January. So what I've done is to write a bit of script that goes and finds which schools they are on that 9:30, their addresses, Ofsted grades, heads' names, email addresses, and so on. To begin with, we had an idea that it was best to actually write to the heads with physical material. And so we used crowdfunding and got more than £1,000 to do this, which meant that every week we selected 20 heads at random from those that had got the reports and sent them snail mail, postage, with stamped addressed envelopes, handwritten addresses and so on, and a postcard to reply, making it as easy as possible and as personal as possible. Well, that was pretty successful. This got a response rate of 25%, which I think no one else in England gets anywhere near when trying to get responses from heads. On a European project, I found that some other countries get much higher response rates. In Austria, we got up to 100%. But in England, I think you get a lot of people at universities sending out, unions sending out, Ofsted sending out. Schools are very busy anyway. So 25% is pretty good. When that money ran out, we then switched to emails. So we emailed everybody who'd got the results there. And that meant that we got a bigger response rate, a lower response rate, 10%, but we were approaching more people. So what was in the questionnaire? Well, we had two sections to it. One was where we gave statements, 10 statements, and asked for response on the scale, like responses from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And then the second part was any additional thoughts would be very welcome. And about half of those who responded put in additional thoughts. But were the ones that we got representative of those who got their reports? So what we did was to compare those who returned the questionnaire with those that didn't return the questionnaire, looking at their Ofsted grades, looking at whether how many were the students who were entitled to free school meals, whether they were primary or secondary schools, whether they were maintained or trust, and whether we'd done it with the letters to begin with or emails later on. Well, for all of those, they were no difference from the ones that we got back from the ones that we didn't get back, except for the maintained trust, where we were getting more from the maintained schools than the trusts. Perhaps because it was more bureaucratic in the trusts. We don't actually know, although we could speculate. So the ratings of the statements. So the full reports are in the, sorry, full results are in the report. And here I'm going to pick out 5 just to highlight and then just comment briefly on the other 5. And for each rating, I checked to see whether they were different on key factors. So the first statement was the ratings given in the report were fair. And here you can see the percentage of those who agreed. I've collapsed together the strongly agree with agree and then the strongly disagree with this, just to make it easier in doing a PowerPoint. And you can see that just over half felt that they got the reports were fair. What percentage should that be? Well, I leave it to you. In my book, I think it should be much higher than that. They should be seeing what was done to them as fair. But of course, there is an issue about the meaning of fair here. Was this fair in that it was a fair representative of the school, or was it fair in the sense that Ofsted inspectors followed what they were meant to do? And I should mention also that we've got achievement here rated in the ratings, that the report were fair. And of course, that means progress, or in earlier speak, value added. So for GCSE, that will be against the entry scores at Key Stage 2. And for primary schools, it would be Key Stage 2 as the outcome and then the baseline. But this year, we couldn't use Key Stage 2 as a baseline for GCSE because of COVID. And there was no baseline for the thing. So what exactly were we seeing underachievement? They must have used proxies, something to worry about. And also, let's not forget context. And that means when we look at progress, we look at the progress for individual children. One meaning of value added, A, for point A. Point B is where we take into account the progress given the context of the school. Well, those data are available to HMI. I think many won't realize it's there, but it's not to be used in the ratings. So it kind of provides some context for this context. So the advice given by inspectors was valuable. Well, we know that Ofsted think that their advice is a key way in which they can improve schools. They told us as much when I did an investigation of the ways in which they were working with Karen Jones some years ago. So was the advice valuable? Well, in the opinions of the heads, about 40% almost agreed with that. But 25% thought not. Well, there is an issue here, and I think we need to be careful about it. Incidentally, there was no difference according to what Ofsted grades they were given for the previous statement or for this statement, or by deprivation and so on. So we need to ask the question, why was it not valued? Well, in some cases, they weren't given any advice, so we were told by the heads when they wrote something. But also, we know from studies of marking of students' work that if you give advice alongside a grade, then often the advice is ignored because the grade is there. Well, maybe that's happening here. Something to ponder. The inspection improved my well-being. Well, we might not want it to improve it, but we certainly don't want it to harm it. Nearly 70% were saying it didn't improve the well-being. A few thought it did. And maybe we need a bit more probing of that, and the qualitative work that we read about later will be more insightful there. At the Select Committee, a couple of weeks ago, it was said that 10 head teachers had reported feeling suicidal. and you will read in the qualitative part, or hear in the qualitative part, about examples of that. The new inspection framework was an improvement. Well, it was produced as a result of a supposedly large consultation, the Big Listening, a Big Listen, and it was supposed to be less work for the schools. It was meant to differentiate different aspects of the school and provide more information to parents, and so on and so on and so on. So what did the heads think? Well, more than 60% said that it wasn't. About 1 in 5 thought that it was. A positive impact on the institution. This is a key thing, because Ofsted should be improving the institutions, because the aim is to raise standards. What did the heads say? Well, about a third were agreeing with this, but nearly half of them said not. And here's the rub. This is the one thing. Frank, can you just stop this? I've got to deal with a code. Hi. This was the one question where we saw variation according to how the Ofsted ratings came. And those who got low Ofsted ratings were more inclined to disagree that it had a positive impact. So there is a paradox and something to take into account for future inspections. And it's a worry. How do you give bad news and have a positive impact? Well, it's a challenge for teachers, it's a challenge for Ofsted, and it hasn't been cracked yet. Well, some heads clearly reported a good Ofsted. We can see it in the ratings that they gave, we can see it in the comments that they made. And if we focus just on the 8 statements linked directly to Ofsted's work, then we find that 12% picked agree or strongly agree to these comments. Some people had a good Ofsted, liked it, approved of their inspectors, thought they did a good job, good advice, and so on. But at the opposite end, 28% disagreed or strongly disagreed to these points. So that more than double had significantly less favourable experiences. And none of this varied across the key variables that I was talking about: Ofsted ratings, percentage-free school meals, and so on. Now, the other 5 statements, which I'll spend less time on, were: the inspection process was supportive, I spent just a little time on preparing, the trust of the authority were helpful, effectively challenged Ofsted, and my career was positively impacted. And I'll just put up the percentages, but as I do, you might think what percentage you would expect or want to say we're doing that. So the inspection was supportive, 42% agreed with that. Spent just a little time preparing, 8%. Well, gosh, schools are spending a long time on inspection. My trust was helpful, 64%, or the authority. We effectively challenged Ofsted, 56%. Not sure what that should be. And my career was positively impacted on the inspection, about a quarter. Well, what I've done here is to report the bones of the questionnaire. And now we move on to the flesh on top of the bones with the comments. And I'll stop there.
Frank, could you put up my slides, please?
Yeah. I think, let me just... Is everybody still with us here? Because I think there was a bit of interruption there, and I tried to... Oh, thank you. Andy's sort of thumbs up. So I think we just lost the end of that there, Peter, because we had a sort of audio sort of clash. So, but anyway.
Well, I can briefly just mention there that last bit there, that people effectively challenged the Ofsted inspection, 56%, career positively impacted, 25%.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. So if you can stop sharing, I'll then share mine. I think that's the way we do it. And is that there for you now, Frank?
Yes, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And can I say at the beginning that I've just been reading about William Blythe, the captain of the Bounty in which the infamous mutiny took place. Now, he was a very strict disciplinarian who insisted on lashing sailors for the slightest infringement. His infamous saying, which he repeated often, was, "Lashings will continue until morale improves." Now, lashings will continue until morale improves. I thought this deep insight into the psychology of human motivation should be shared with you and no doubt also with Ofsted. Right, let me turn to the head's comments, and having analysed them, 4 main themes came out for me. Frank, we're moving on.
There you go.
The comments varied from just 2 lines, sometimes to over 4 pages. On top of that, sometimes we got involved in an email exchange with heads, and 1 or 2 also asked to be contacted by phone, and that helped us to really understand their concerns. Second point I want to make is that all the names in our report have been generated by computer. Now, for some of you in the audience, that means as you recognize your remarks in the report, you may find that your sex has been changed from male to female or vice versa. Please, that's not my fault. Blame the computer. Third point, I analysed the first set before the end of April and the second batch at the end of May. Now, the comforting fact here was that the same main themes emerged from both sets of responses, which gives us much more confidence in the findings. It adds weight to the security of what we found.
Can I just say, exception? Yeah, can I just say, Frank, before you move on?
Yes.
One of the things that Ofsted often says is that things need to bed down. They need to settle. But actually, I think that's a very telling comment that you made there, wasn't it? About you would hope that there would be some sort of improvement over time, but that certainly didn't come from your findings.
You'll see in a minute or two that the same complaints were being made in January as in May. So there was no improvement. The one exception to the same findings all the time was that towards the end of May, we picked up 3 heads who were saying that secondary inspectors were evaluating primary schools. Now, I'll say a little more about that in a moment. Can we move on?
Yeah.
That's the 4 themes that came out were the new framework, a lot of remarks about the context, the impact on heads, on their staff, on the schools and the inspectors. And then at the end, I'll look at some of the positive comments that were made. Let's move to the new framework. Now, I'm using the actual phrases here that people wrote to us. And so these are the original remarks that heads made. So on the new framework, here's a head saying it's the rigid new system that's the problem. Before there was 1 overall judgment and now there are 9. Second major point, attendance and behaviour being treated together is a farce. They are 2 separate things that should be treated as such. Now, some people said, heads wrote to us to say, we can influence attendance, but we can't control it. And getting a poor grade on attendance brought down behaviour as well, even although their behaviour in the school was excellent. And they saw that as unjust and a nonsense. On the third point here, when you turn to the actual language that the heads used, the adjectives were brutal, harsh, relentless and grueling. One head also wrote, the feelings of bitterness still lingers months after the inspection. Another head wrote, the conclusions were formed early and evidence was then used selectively to support those conclusions. Now, I've been, as Frank said right at the beginning, Peter and I have been looking at Ofsted inspections for years. That 4th point, I remember when writing a book in 2017 on the leopard will not change its spots, exactly the same criticism being mentioned then as now. Let's move on again. The final report didn't reflect the discussions with inspectors. Now, a number of heads said a lot of favourable comments were made in the meetings with inspectors, but none of them appeared in the report, and they felt that was unjust. Second point, what happens when heads are unhappy about the report and try and complain about it? One head wrote, you're given the chance to comment or complain, but if you comment, you lose the right to complain. This is laughable. Now, this is the need for an independent complaints procedure, which many people, including all of us in the report, have been asking of for years without ever succeeding in getting one. Next point about the amount of preparation. Now, this was the thing that Peter mentioned, which had the lowest agreement, only 8%. Ofsted advice that no preparation is necessary is a nonsense. Others said the new framework has caused us a massive increase in workload, and that was a very repeated remark. To sum up on the framework, here's our head saying, the experience was the worst I've had. It hasn't contributed to our well-being or to school improvement, and I'm not surprised that there's now a recruitment crisis for school leadership. Nor am I surprised. Let's move to the context. Now, here are schools who, when they wrote to us, said that they had schools with high mobility of pupils, above national average for the number of disadvantaged pupils, for vulnerable pupils, for SEND pupils, pupils with high needs, high percentage of children on free school needs, and yet they felt none of this was being seriously considered by the inspectorate. One man wrote, one man or woman, I'm not sure which, if you're in a school in an area of disadvantage, you're on the back foot. I wouldn't recommend any aspiring leader to take over a school like mine under this framework. Even more strongly, the second head here, context wasn't taken into consideration at all. Now, those are the original capital letters in the comments that were sent to us. So I've just included that as the original emphasis. Inspectors, the third person saying, inspectors were unable to consider the context due to the new framework using a secure fit model. Now, this issue is at the heart of a lot of the problems that heads wrote to us about. The move from a best fit model to a secure fit model. It means, as you all know, probably much better than I, that a grade can only be awarded if every statement in a toolkit is met. So supposing there are 10 statements in this particular issue, if one of them is not met, you will be downgraded. One head said even a slight departure from the statement in the toolkit meant that they were downgraded. Let's move to the impact. Firstly, on heads and staff. First head, the inspection caused both mental and physical distress to the entire senior team. Second, I'm determined to retire before the next inspection. And look at this rhetorical question this head said he asked of the inspectorate. What kind of a system is it where you have to ask me if I have someone at home to talk to about my well-being in case it's affected by your inspection? I mean, what kind of a system is that, right? Another head said, I told them when they asked me about was I feeling okay? I said, no, I wasn't okay. The inspectors didn't know what to do. They just said, let's move on. Out of the 100 people who wrote to us, as many as 8 heads out of 100 decided to quit in response to their inspection. Now that strikes me as deeply concerning. I don't think our educational system can afford the loss of committed heads at this rate. Let's move on again. The impact on the inspectors. Now, notice how thoughtful some of these heads were being. They not only noticed the impact on themselves and on their staff, but on their inspectors as well. The stresses on inspectors were so relentless that Key Stage 2 staff said none of them were seen, oh, I can see that's a mistake, that's my mistake, were seen in 2 days. It's funny, I've looked at these slides time and time again, and I haven't noticed that until just now, but it is 2 days. On the schools, What did one head say? We learnt nothing from the inspection. And then some very serious comments were made by those primary heads who objected to being inspected by secondary inspectors. They demonstrated a lack of understanding of early years practice and expectations. The head went on to say, we had 2 3-year-olds being judged on the same criteria as 15-year-olds. And one even wrote to say, ironically, the inspection impacted on pupil attendance unfavourably. I'm coming to the last one, positive comments. Of the first 100 that we've analysed, 14 out of the 100 spoke highly and sometimes very highly of their experience of inspection. For example, the inspection team was very fair, understanding, and conducted the inspection sensitively. But reflecting on this, isn't that what we would expect for the vast majority? If the inspection system was doing its job properly, shouldn't there be 86 saying the inspection team were fair and not just 14? Shouldn't it be the other way round? So my final comment is this. The clear majority were not only dissatisfied with their inspection reports, they were angry at the treatment their school had received by some inspectors. I'm now going to pass over to Chris Pascal.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to just bring in, it's Frank here. I'm not sure if is Patrick Cozier actually joined the conference. Not sure if he's there. Can you unmute Patrick if you are there and let us know? No. Okay, so but I do know John Hayes is here because I've seen his face there. So John, can you unmute yourself and just sort of give us an indication of your experience in terms of all of this?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great, thank you. So my background, I'm 38 years into this job as a teacher and head teacher. I'm retiring this year. I've been head of a number of schools. Currently, I'm head teacher at Gospel Oak School in Camden, exec head at Netley campus where I am today. Prior to that, I was an advisor and did my own Ofsted training back then when I was advisor and eventually head of school improvement in the London Borough of Islington. So I've been through this process. I've been around the block a number of times. And I would say that this framework was the most challenging, in my opinion, the most unfair that I've ever been subjected to. So this is at Gospel Oak in January when we got the call. Prior to that, both of my previous inspections had judged us as outstanding. But this is not sour grapes. We came out of it with good for everything, but apart from attendance and behaviour, and that is the key issue for me. When we talk about Ofsted not understanding the context, I had probably about 2 to 3 minutes during the initial online meeting on the Monday when I was asked to describe the context of my school. And I tried to explain about our deficit budget, our incredibly steep rate of increase in special educational needs and children with very complex needs, falling staff ratios, all of those things, which, and I think this is key to the discussion we're having, that already, as a head teacher and leader in a school in London, already makes me stressed pretty much every day. So when you then add the additional and I think unnecessary stress that Ofsted currently brings, that is the thing that I think is a significant health and safety risk for teachers and leaders in schools at the moment. The significant issue for us was when we got to the end of day 2, and I was told that behaviour and attendance was looking like it might need attention. Now, the context there is behaviour in my school at Gospel Oak, I'm very proud to say, has always been exceptional because we work incredibly hard at it. The lead HMI on the walk around with me agreed, and in fact at one point asked me how we managed to get our children to be so incredibly polite, well-mannered and well-behaved throughout the school. and we had quite a long conversation about our ethos and our approach. And yet they still wanted to pick a lot of holes in our attendance data. And for that reason, she felt that the whole judgment would drop not from strong to expected, but actually drop into needs attention. I queried this. I said I couldn't see how that could possibly be correct and accurate and fair. And I asked that they contact Ofsted head office overnight to double check with someone senior that they were correctly applying the framework. The following morning, we had our morning meeting with my senior leaders and the whole of the Ofsted team. And she confirmed that overnight Ofsted had confirmed that not only was it looking like needs attention, but because that needed attention, she was therefore concluding that leadership and governance may well need attention too. At which point, one of my senior leaders left the room in tears. I found myself crying. My deputy, who's also DSL, came in at that point, left the room and immediately phoned the helpline. There was a further call to the helpline later in the day from my governors. It was horrific. It was traumatizing, and even now I find myself getting upset just describing it to you. By the end, we fought hard. Everything else came out as strong standard. It is the secure fit that we've just identified, I think is for me, the key thing that is making this framework intolerable, and I believe deeply unfair. And as has been described, we were told that once they'd agreed that we would be expected standard for attendance and behaviour, that it was simply that one of the elements describing attendance was not met, and therefore because one element of strong was not met, all of it had to be expected. And I argued, because why not? What have I got to lose? And they just sat and stared at me. In terms of my well-being, they were repeatedly asking me, how was I? And when we got into that phase of the inspection, I said, I'm not good. In fact, I'm terrified. And I had the same experience. We then moved on to the next question. The response from senior HMI at the helpline to my deputy and my governors was, would you like us to pause? So pause means wait for between 1 and I believe 5 days for it to resume. Why on earth would I do that to myself? Why would I do that to my staff? And I'd said to my deputy, I wrote on a piece of paper and held it up, and I heard this part of the conversation, do not let them stop. I cannot go through this again. So it was harrowing. It was horrific. My further question around the secure fit was that we got strong for everything else, but I have no idea whether or not we got any of the descriptors towards exceptional, because you don't know that. You only know that you get the grade that you are 100% secure in. So in terms of the report, and despite the fact that the lead HMI told me that the wording for behaviour would come through in the report to describe the amazing behaviour, when I finally got the report, I realised that was not true, because they have to write to within the box that you are graded in. They can't give you anything that celebrates, and we're told this is all about celebrating school success. It quite frankly isn't. There was nothing there about celebrating behaviour. I've just looked back at my report. I haven't looked at it for a long time. I looked at it in preparation for today. It's basically 2 sentences that describe the behaviour of the children, and it's basically, yeah, it's fine. John, and I know it's not fine.
John, can I?
It's amazing. Please interrupt me.
No, sorry. I just want, because I think I'm conscious of the fact that there is a duty of care when schools get inspected. Can you just give a little bit of an indication of how Ofsted showed their lack of duty of care to you after the inspection?
Indeed. So since the phone calls went in, I did anticipate that Ofsted somebody would contact me to genuinely see how I was, given that they've had all of this training in leaders' well-being. I heard nothing. When we finally got the final report, there was a survey to complete, and I wrote in great length about how appalling I found the whole thing and how upsetting and how damaging to my and others' well-being I felt it to be. And they've never come back to me on that. It just so happens, and I won't bore you with the detail, that our DCS in Camden contacted senior HMI in London, and myself and a colleague head got a meeting with two senior HMI to meet face-to-face across the table for an hour and tell them exactly what we thought. They apologised for all of it, but I've had nothing in writing. I've had no formal contact with anybody from Ofsted head office about my experience. Quite frankly, the whole nonsense that they're trying to secure our well-being is not, I don't believe it to be even true. I think they're paying lip service to that. And as I think a comment in one of the slides previously, how on earth can they be going out into schools with a framework that is so risky to head teachers that they have to check, as they did with me, that I had a support network who would prevent me from spiraling when we got into the depths of this inspection? How can you do that to somebody, saying, before I do all of this, I'm just going to check you've got somebody who's going to look after you when this is all really, really bad, which is essentially what they're saying. How do you have a framework that does that? It's a disgrace.
Thank you, John. And also thank you for going public on this as well. It's very helpful. Jane Perryman. Are you
Yes.
there? Oh, there you are. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, lots of claps going there, John, sort of appreciating that. I mean, in a way, it's important that colleagues like yourself do stand up. It really is. Jane, over to you.
I'm actually feeling quite emotional after that, John. Thank you for sharing. It was it's hard for me to speak after that, because it's just difficult for all of us to hear, but not as much as for you to experience. So I'm responding to this paper from the perspective of some research I did on the 2019 framework as part of the Beyond Ofsted team. And my reaction is just one of sadness and disappointment, because what we can see from this research and this report is that the 2025 framework doesn't fix the problems of the 2019 system. It just produces a different configuration of the same underlying issues: the stress, the lack of trust, the low usefulness and weak legitimacy. And what we're actually hearing from people is that actually in many ways it is worse. So I just wanted to reflect on some of the findings from this report and how they are backed up by findings about the 2019 framework. So the negative experience remains widespread, even among successful schools. I think the report is right to acknowledge the 14 positive heads, because research always gets condemned for only talking to the negatives. I'm currently writing a paper where I just looked at the responses from the outstanding schools under the 2019 framework, and I've just found that they're just as negative about inspection as the whole cohort. So in our research, 59% of head teachers found their experience of inspection was very or somewhat negative. So actually, it appears to be one of the things that's getting worse. Obviously, the impact on well-being and stress is one of the most important aspects to look at, given the unfortunate events which led to all this reform, and I say reform like that. Under Beyond Ofsted, our head teachers mentioned 93% higher levels of personal stress. And for them, I mean, there are so many quotations which are akin to those in this report. I think that's one of the things I found so disappointing. It was just like reading the data from the 2019 framework, but some of it was worse. There's also the workload burden. Under the 2019 framework, head teachers said 1.22% of teachers said they did nothing special to prepare, and 91% agreed that there was an increase in workload during inspection. And somebody summed up the reason for that very well, because it's not just inspection itself, it's the whole preparation and the way it drives the school. So somebody said, Ofsted drives workload because schools must ensure they're Ofsted compliant in every way. My experience has been that looming Ofsted inspections have driven workload and stress levels. Under 2019, people talked about unsustainable or harmful burdens into the system, and 77% of our respondents said it stifled creativity and innovation. Because what people don't really talk about is when this whole Ofsted industry is going on, the school, its heads, its teachers can't focus on what is good for the school cohort. It's just basically about jumping through Ofsted hoops. And the final thing I wanted to say on this quantitative data was this issue of context not being properly recognised came up repeatedly. We particularly talked about primary schools complaining that they could not, that they were being inspected under a secondary framework, which made things impossible and created a ridiculous workload. And of course, the low SES schools. One said, our school is poverty stricken with no blue pens, paints or resources. We have a high percentage of VAL, 4 children in my class who don't speak any English at all. And yet they come in and they judge us as if we are, you know, in some leafy suburb. So this is obviously still going on. I found it really interesting to read in the report the new framework specific problems, which have already been mentioned, particularly John talking about the rigidity of the secure fit. And finally, because I'm conscious of time and I think we need to hear about the victims of Ofsted rather than us studying it, our implications completely overlapped. We said there needed to be fundamental reform, not incremental change. We need to move to a lower stakes, more supportive system and somehow rebuild trust in inspection, which is important as well, because we can't, the variability of inspectors, which people have mentioned, and our lack of trust in the fairness of the results and the final report doesn't help the system in any way at all. So I will now hand over.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. I'm having difficulties moving my screen on, but I do know that the next session is actually talking about asking for colleagues to, to sort of comment. I know we've had a number, and I'll introduce Chris Pascal now, if that's okay, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you. And I'm just listening to this and having been immersed in that for the last few weeks and then listening to this tonight, it makes me angry over and over and over again. And I just wanted to say at this point, this is the first independent review of the Ofsted inspection process. And I'm proud of my 4 colleagues here who have done the lion's share of the work on this. I'm proud of all the head teachers who've reported and given us their narratives. Because I think what this process has enabled or has done is use what I believe as a researcher is use a humane evaluation process to look at and what is fundamentally and clearly an inhumane system, which somebody in the chat says it terrorises people. So I'm just going to make a quick comment, and then I'm going to invite each of our my colleagues to give a quick colleague, and then I'm going to go to those of you in the chat too, and thank you for posting reflections and comments and questions as well. But I think it's really important with evaluations that we don't just look at metrics and quality. You'll notice ours had a bit of metrics, a bit of qual, and a bit of quant. I'm a qual researcher because I think we are engaged in a science of the social. We're involved with human beings, and that stories matter. And stories, the statistics are quite cold and they're easy to wriggle out of or lie about. But stories are lived realities. And John, you've been amazing tonight to share your story. But you are standing up on behalf of a lot of other people, is what I know and can hear. So I think as we look ahead, any evaluation of this Ofsted inspection needs to be a humane evaluation, which is very different to what we've got now. It needs to look at more than statistics and metrics and numbers and performativity and really capture the lived reality of that. Because what is clear is people who come into our sector, into education, do it because they deeply care. They have a deep emotional attachment to their professional work. And it's like they're getting beaten up for for doing that deep work they're doing for social justice and for the communities that they live for. And I know that because that's the group I work with. And this seems to me a totally brutal, inhumane and unproductive way of going about it. And I think if this independent evaluation has shone a light on that, and I hope more people will speak up and join it and tell their narratives. I think Ruth Perry, that's her legacy, isn't it? She's empowered us to make us who've been you've been invisible in the system and silenced in that system to find our voice and to start to say this has to change, because I really believe it does. And I'm hoping this report is just the start of that. I've had my opportunity to say my piece, but stories really matter in all cultures, in all communities. And if our research, the metrics are, I'm not an anti-quack, the metrics tell their story as well. But these are the stories behind those metrics, and they really bring those metrics to life and expose the need for change. I'm now going to invite my colleagues one at a time to give their overall kind of reflection about where they feel we are at this point in time, and then I'm going to turn to what's in the chat. So Frank, you're the one that shared on behalf of all those narratives we had, the stories tonight. So I'm going to start with you, Frank, to give your kind of perspective on this experience that we 5 have lived through.
Yeah, well, I think for me, the overriding factor that I want to get across is I'm not an opponent of inspection. But I feel as though the journey of inspection since 1992 has deteriorated to the point where it basically is a bit of a hit and miss approach. And often you hear people say, I was lucky with the inspection team. And I think someone said, you shouldn't be lucky with an inspection team. You should be able to rely on them. But I think for me, I expected more from the new government. I saw Ofsted inspection and the way it was conducted as fairly sort of an easy avenue to go down. And I was quite disappointed with the reaction of the government in terms of how it was going to tackle the major issues that came out of the coroner's report following Ruth Perry's death. And they haven't grasped that. And one of the good things that could happen is, a shift in government thinking, a shift in a prime minister might lead to the change that's required. So I don't see this as the end of the road. This is just, there's another curve in the road, and actually we've got to ride that curve and get to a better place. So, and I think this report goes some of the way to doing that.
Thank you. Okay, Peter, would you like to share a perspective, make a comment at this point?
Sure. Could you switch the sound off on yours? When I first linked up with Frank Coffield, the reason why he and I chimed was that I used the Latin phrase. It was Ofsted delenda est, and it actually comes from campaigns in Rome to get rid of Carthage, Carthago delenda est. And he, being a Latin scholar, recognized it immediately. Unfortunately, we didn't do it. What it means is Ofsted must be destroyed. I don't think we can just reform it. I'm going to pick up our points later, and I want to hear what other people have to say. But let me say I'm on the other extreme from Frank Norris on the way forward, and I'll put a way forward into the chat.
It's also very interesting, Peter, that we've managed to do this, and even though we sit on those sort of different positions, we've never fallen out over it. It's just we need change. We desperately need change. But anyway. Sorry,
Thank you, Peter. Okay, Colin, would you like to have a say tonight, freely, not bound by slides?
Unmute yourself there, Colin.
Okay. It's not.
Can he? Can I do it for you? I don't know if I can. Do you want to go to Frank Coffield just while we...
Yeah, go on, Frank Coffield then, yeah.
And if Peter mutes himself as well.
Can I say to...
That's great. Oh, he's still muted as well. Frank, you're still muted.
I think, am I still?
Oh, you're on, Colin, now, so let's go with
Okay.
Colin.
Just like to say, I agree with Frank, then why wouldn't I, that inspection is still a crucial part of the accountability process. I date back to 1997 when, as an inspector, as a just retired inspector, I posed an article in The Guardian with the title, "There has to be a better way." And 30 years later, the problem is still there. There has to be a better way. And let's hope this kind of report helps to achieve that.
Thank you, Colin. Frank, have you unmuted yourself now? Yes, there we go. Thank you.
Do I say to to all of you, I really do think this is a time for people who haven't had a chance to speak at all or to make just chat comments, for them to speak up and get a chance to say something in more detail. I've had 15 minutes. I'm happy to pass my time on to others in this setup.
Chris, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Frank. And the chat is quite lively. There's 10 or 12. I'm just going to pick 3 or 4 out, and just to say to everybody that's posted something, following this up, we are going to post some responses to every comment there, but we can't, of course, tonight have the time to do all that. So I'm going to start with a comment by Anne Rose, who says that listening to these findings, she's wondering whether inspection readiness has become a separate organisational process in its own right, so that inspection readiness is taken over from school improvement, and they're having to switch. School leaders are having to switch to a distinct inspection preparation mode when inspection becomes lively. So it's actually getting in the way of the ongoing school improvement processes. So I'm now going to invite anybody from my colleagues here to comment on that. Would one of you like to kind of say something there in response to what Anne Rose is saying? She also says, has it become her second comment, has it become a compliance model rather than a quality development model?
I know that we've got a couple of people with their hands up. Are those? I think these may be related to that question, but should we pick those up then first?
Okay. Yeah.
So should we go? I think Nadia, you had your hand up first. I think, and then it was John Hayes.
I like that question, and I want to attach another question with it. Are there any other examples from other countries and contexts where there are some humane way of doing inspection or things like inspections? Are there some good examples or good practices that we can test here in England?
I think Peter's got his hand up there as a response, Chris. John?
Yeah, go on, and Colin.
Go on.
Yeah,
Thanks very much, Nadia, and good to see your question there. I'll say 2 things. One is that the 2 Western countries that top the PISA tables are Estonia and Finland. They have no inspection system.
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever. And if we look at other places, and I was part of a European study of inspection, nobody has anything like Ofsted, as expensive and as aggressive. No other country.
My point would be, yes, I agree there are other examples that we could draw on. But let me just say, our colleagues in Wales do not have an inspection system that is not too dissimilar to ours, but doesn't receive the same amount of criticism. Why?
Thanks, Colin. And John, you've got your hands up as well.
Yeah, I think just the direct question about whether this has become a compliance model and the extent to which we're preparing. From my experience and my other schools, yes, we are preparing for months, if not years in advance. And the advice that we are that we have been given is work through the toolkit, make sure you know how you're judging yourself, and find your evidence to prove it. And that's a massive undertaking.
Yes.
And we always work to the mantra that we're not just doing it for Ofsted, we're doing the right thing in the best interest of the kids. However, under this framework, and my experience of previous ones, but I think this one's worse, you definitely do need to be ready and prepared, because that's the way it plays out. It's not just them dropping into your school and making judgments. It's a test, and you need to do your revision.
It's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. Frank, could we stop screen sharing, because I can't see everybody's screen, and then I can see if anybody else has got anything there. I can't see any other hands. Can you?
I think I was interested in a point in the chat that Ian Widows. Ian, are you still here? He said the pause was used by Sir Martin Oliver's response to Education Committee on Tuesday as a key measure to address the distress caused by inspection. He doesn't seem to have really thought through how school leaders view this. And I think it's as if he's become sort of just immersed in that building, and actually he's lost the ability to connect, with people who are experiencing inspection. But I think, can you see another hand up there, Julie? Chris?
Yeah, I can see Julie's got a hand up. Actually, Frank's got. Do you want to respond to that one, Frank?
Sorry, Frank.
Julie can see.
No, I just wanted to add to the conversation that we seem to be all agreeing that we have an inhumane system here, and yet it's costing us 208 million a year. 208 million. I mean, it's a vast sum of money that could be used in very much better ways to help schools that need support. I just want to put that into the argument.
Yeah, it's value for money, and in fact, what that's doing is putting intolerable, and I use that word very carefully, intolerable stresses and pressures on the people who are working at the front line.
Can I also point out, it's not just inspection. Inspection is part of a high-stakes accountability system involving league tables, data, whatever. And so it's an accurate reflection of an accountability system that is drastically revisiting, including inspection, of course, but in other aspects too.
Yeah.
No, I actually, Chris, I know who Julie is, so it's quite good. This, so yeah.
Come
Julie,
on, Julie. Shall we invite Julie to have a voice now?
Hi. Thank you. Sorry. So I'm chair of the National Association of Small Schools, and I've done some things with Frank before, and we've done articles for the press. So it's really we agree it's a completely flawed system. It shouldn't be there. It should be abolished. Unfortunately, we've still got it at the moment, and it's trying to navigate our way through it. And what's happening to everyone? It's like even worse for small schools. They still don't understand it. We talked to Ofsted and tried to let them know what it's like to be inspect a small school, and they still really don't get it. And as you say, you spend in secondary colleagues to inspect as well. We had a research meeting on Monday, and what had happened was we'd put out a call for anyone to get back to us as well about the new framework, and a teacher got in touch with me on LinkedIn. And it was just devastating. And we were meeting with Ofsted. So we meet with Ofsted regularly to try and say, please think about small schools. And so one of the Ofsted inspectors did get in touch with the school. And they did feel kind of listened to and vindicated, but it did not change it. So like as John was saying, nothing was changed. But that head teacher was at the meeting on Monday and has since resigned. And the young teacher that got in touch with me is leaving the teaching profession completely. So small school, you can imagine it's probably the head and 3 teachers, and the head and one of the teachers has already gone. So what I was just going to ask is that I totally agree. It's not fit for purpose. But as we carry on to do these surveys, is there any way that you can pull out the impact, particularly on small schools? Because I didn't see whether you put primary schools, you put secondary, and you look maths and trust, but the size of the schools as well. I was just wondering whether you'd be able to look at that as time goes on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm quite anxious for us to have a real focus on early years settings as well, because they're largely smaller, much smaller settings, and the impact is there, but that's for the future. Something that's a couple of people in the chat and kind of come up, Mitali and also David Camps linking those two comments around which is about the variability of experience and the variability of application, variance between inspectors that come and the experience of those individuals, but also variability in how the criterion are applied. There's a lack of consistency there, which links, I think, to this notion that Ian Widow's flagged about fairness. And I don't know whether Ian or David or Mitali want to come in and say a little bit more about that variance and fairness at this point.
Chris, I'm going to pick that up in my last 5 points. So I don't want to kind of repeat it here, but I think it is absolutely crucial to consider the variability that we've seen in the qualitative experiences and the ratings that people have done. So I'll pick that up later, but I'm interested to hear other people's points on that.
Yeah, as I said, there were 2 or 3 in the chat. So David, come on. I'm interested to hear, you sparked this one off and then others have followed. We can't hear you, David.
Are you muted there, David?
Sorry, I think it's my.
Oh, no, we've got you now.
I've got to put on. Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm really privileged that I get to see lots of inspections, which really helps me to kind of see some of that typicality from an inspector perspective. And it's really interesting in terms of what we're seeing. We saw it with the previous inspection framework, where it took, a while for the inspectors to understand how to approach some of those, some of the criteria and so forth. I think it would be fair to say that that's consistent in terms of this new toolkit in how it's being applied and interpretation. I think it is still very subjective, and that means that leaders' experiences vary significantly. But it also means that leaders don't have a secure base in which to prepare for that inspection, because it's all dependent upon who's coming through the door. And obviously we have those indications through your IDSR, through your VIED, which will help you to prepare for some of that toolkit. But because it's so subjective, it's really difficult for leaders to be able to feel in a confident position. And I think that also then has a detrimental impact on people's well-being, because they don't know what they're going to experience, what they're going to have, how it's going to be handled, how perceptive the inspection team and the lead inspector will be on their school context. And that's my biggest concern currently with the inspections I'm part of.
Yeah. Thank you. And Mitali, on the website, it says Mitali, who posted something about the variance as well. Would you like to say something? Or Emily has got a hand up as well.
Hi everybody. Yeah, hi. I'm CEO at Three Spires Trust for Primary and Secondary, working across the West Midlands, and I'm pretty sure we contributed to the research. I think just a point that, and apologies, I did arrive late, so it may have been raised, but a point for me in terms of where we are, particularly in regard to secondary education at the moment, is around the lack of innovation in the system. We know that there's some really difficult, wicked problems in terms of, curriculum, suitability, pathways, the way that we offer advice and guidance to our young people. And there is a real disproportionate amount of attention that goes into preparation for an inspection. And the amount of times I'm talking to my heads about being more aware that actually the agenda that we serve is for our young people in our communities than any other agenda that needs to be satisfied. But fundamentally, the socialization, the conditioning of our heads is such that they cannot, or seemingly do not, sense that they have the permissions to look at their student community and body first and foremost beyond any inspection regime. So there's a distorted position in leadership where that becomes the agenda that we satisfy over and above and beyond looking at what our young people in front of us need. And that's my concern. So we're writing a WM back. We're looking at creating, pathways that lead into high quality vocational technical courses. And, the energy that needs, the dynamism and the innovation that needs, is very difficult when the inertia that the inspection regime puts in slows that progress to almost to a halt. So I think there's another dimension that we're not considering in terms of school transformation. And that would be, you know, something that I know we grapple with as a trust. Have we lost sight of what genuine school improvement should look like because we're trying to satisfy an inspection framework that is antiquated, you know, and in many ways, you know, mechanistic, raising the stakes and not necessarily generating the positivity. So I'd agree with everything that Peter's said. Up until now, I think I'd completely subscribe to that bold position around inspection. I was in Berlin. I had a really interesting time looking at their technical routes through and the way that they look to do sort of quality assurance. And I feel we're an outlier. And I'm really surprised that we haven't had more advocacy for change. But clearly, that's just our view in our trust.
Emily, I think there's many on this call, this conference tonight that are clapping and shouting for the. And I think Peter's, you call it his bold position, is a bold position, but there seems to be an ethical and moral value in that position to have, that if we don't call it out, and that's why I think the narratives and the stories are really important. We need to make this very visible, and it's what you brought into the room tonight is a very optimistic and empowering encouragement for us to be bolder and to be braver and be empowered to speak it out and say what it is and say what we want and do something else with it.
Thank you, Christy. I think one last point from me. I think we need to reframe the debate. Leaders like myself will always look like they've they have got a position that's oppositional because maybe Ofsted doesn't serve our schools particularly well. You know, we haven't got exemplary in every category in every school, so there's that sense that, well, it's not, you know, it's not helping to promote. So it's difficult when you work within the sector. But I think if we start to question the way that it impacts on the other areas of school improvement that are so critical at this time, when we look at the NEETs and we look at the, you know, the Alan Milburn report, and we can see that we have some really difficult challenges around engagement and, you know, recruitment, retention. I know much of that's been rehearsed on the call already, but I think for me it's about repositioning the why. And then maybe those ethical and moral considerations become more they become more of a priority, I think, in terms of what we're grappling with. But anyway, I'll let others come in now.
Thanks, Emily. It's a fantastic contribution. Thank you. And Mitali, you've been very patient. So
thank you. No, not at all. It's very interesting to listen. I just wanted to say what the issue we had around consistency was that we were told that unless everything was graded as strong, that leadership and governance could not be graded as strong. And despite the fact that everything else with leadership and governance, they'd just gone over and were thinking that it was strong. But actually, we then discover that lots of schools have been given strong in leadership and governance and not in other areas. So we went back to Ofsted and we complained about a number of aspects of the inspection. We mentioned that and queried that decision. And the response from the person who reviewed the complaint who was obviously employed by Ofsted, was that it wasn't possible for them to comment on other schools. So that was the only response that we got.
I think Chris is probably we're close to ending this part of the session.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But it's timely, I think, in terms of the experiences that John Hayes has had and the experiences that have been shared with us by other senior leaders who've gone down the complaints route, is that actually, unless the evidence base contains the evidence about the complaint, the first round of the complaint response doesn't go anywhere else other than in the evidence base. So, for example, Emily, I was so struck by what you said, and I have to say, because somebody who's worked on the Manchester, the M back up here, I think the issue here is around if you're doing something different and brave, and then actually an inspector sort of treats it, ridicules it, or whatever it may be, they're hardly likely to put the "I ridiculed the comments made by the head teacher" in the evidence base. So what happens is we have a system of complaints which is actually weighted entirely towards the inspector.
Yes. Frank, can I just add to that?
Yeah, and then we'll move on. Yeah.
No, I want to just add to what you've been saying.
Yeah.
That trying to summarize the remarks made by heads about the complaints procedure was, their experience was that you could get small factual errors corrected, but substantial complaints were never upheld.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting that yesterday, I think I mentioned it before, the Christine Gilbert, Martin Oliver mentioned that there was a paper going to the Ofsted board about a level of independence in the management of complaints. But actually, if that doesn't actually involve the lead inspector or the inspectors involved in the complaint being able to respond to the school about the complaint, I don't think it's going to go anywhere very far.
No.
But anyway, thank you so much, Chris, and for others for contributing to that session. What we're going to do now is just move into tidy this up now in terms of, well, where do we go now? So Peter's going to take us through that, and we'll certainly finish, colleagues, at 5:30. I was going to say 7:30, which wouldn't be very good for anybody. But anyway, if I share my screen again now, if I can.
No,
oh, you're all right. You can do that there. Thank you, Peter.
Is that okay? Could you switch your sound?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. So yes.
You there, Peter? Have we lost him again? Peter, you there? Frankie must be sitting next to you, surely, because we can't see him.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
There we are. Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Okay, so I'll not repeat what I've just said, since. Okay, so the first thing is that the well-being of heads. Can you put your volume on? And their staff is at risk and requires urgent attention. So we've seen that by the talk that we've heard today. We've seen it also from the qualitative and quantitative data highlighting the issue. We know that stress is part of teaching, but distress is unacceptable. Inspectors should leave the staff feeling that their work is appreciated and professionalism respected. Change is needed. Well, we've heard that the inspection framework is deficient in a number of respects, and decisions are based beforehand, context is not taken into account, conclusions are based on small numbers, secure fit is a problem, etc., etc., etc. This slide could go on for several pages. I'm not going to do it. The framework doesn't need titivation, it needs completely rethinking. If, as a teacher of research methodology, I were to look at this as an undergraduate project, I would reject it. It's inadequate methodology from a research point of view. Well, we've heard already about the Independent Complaints Commission. Heads don't have confidence in what's happening. Ofsted is marking its own homework. The system's against natural judgments. Let me bet with anybody who wants to bet that what Ofsted are about to announce will not be a satisfactory independent mechanism. We need a completely independent and impartial mechanism for challenging what's been said. And here comes the quality of inspection, not always good enough. Many heads were angry with what they saw, but the variation was dramatic, going from one school to another school to another. The existing quality assurance system isn't working. Does it exist? Head teacher at HMI are trained, but are they then tested? Are they then quality assured? How many are removed each year each week. We've no evidence that there's a quality assurance system that makes any sense. Ofsted need to get a grip. There should be a reasonable consistency of good practice from inspection to inspection.
Reasonable, yeah.
I mentioned earlier the advice is seen by Ofsted as a key way for school improvement. And we know that Ofsted have some really capable people at the top of it. Their HMI inspectors have been selected and they're experienced people who have a lot of knowledge. Schools should be able to rely on providing well-informed advice. In some cases, that advice was not forthcoming even when it was asked for. And less than half found that the advice was valuable. So why? Well, maybe the advice isn't great. Maybe the quality of advice varies. What about the absence? But here's the thing. In studies of marking of students' work, it's been suggested that if you mark the work and give a grade, that the advice on how to improve is ignored. In other words, the grading kind of cancels the message on how to improve. Maybe that's happening in inspection. And if it does, it needs to be addressed, and the separation from grading, if we need it, from advice. This issue needs really thinking about.
4 minutes, Peter.
So the independence advice is required on the framework. So this is number 6, but it could be number 1. Because Ofsted's aim is to improve standards. Inspection impact is the raison d'etre for inspection, costing £200 million a year. We need independent, objective evidence of impact. Well, we're already collecting data on the next lot. It'll take 6 months, perhaps until December. Meanwhile, major reform is needed. And if anybody is technically minded, and they would like to help with the data collection, please email me. And if anybody's experienced in qualitative data analysis who could help, please email me. And we'll stop there. I hope, Frank, that's just in time. There's the email addresses. There's the thank you. And it's been a great 1.5 hours.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everybody who's given time to this. And also, particularly if you've contributed to the survey. We hope that the publicity we've got around this report and the way that we've worked will encourage more schools to return our survey reports so that we can actually get to that 100 a little bit quicker. Because this time round, we'll actually, we've got a set of demands on Ofsted, and we'll be looking to see how well those have been addressed. I have to say, Ofsted repeated that their own evaluation is not coming until 2027. This is the only evaluation that's currently in the public domain.
The only independent one. I mean, unions also have got a view, Frank, but we are totally independent of both unions, DFE, and Ofsted.
Yeah,
and that really
it's as if Colin had read the script, because that's what Christine Gilbert asked for in the report, the Learning Review, following Ruth Perry's passing. An independent, third-party, post-inspection survey process. And what we have discovered is the reason why they're so hesitant to do it. But we will continue to produce the next report. And I just want to thank you all for the support you've given us, both in the way you've responded, but also the personal support you've offered to us as well. So thank you from all of us to all of you. And it will be, until next time, there will be another one. Okay, so thank you everybody for your time, and enjoy the rest of the evening. And all of this will appear on the monitoringofsted.com website sometime next week. So you'll be able to pick up a recording if you wanted to share it, and also a transcript as well. So thank you for your help. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter,
I've left.
I didn't know how to turn down the poll.
Doesn't matter. It's all over there.
I know, but I mean, for the